Hey there guys, it's TJ, and today I want to talk about something serious. Because my feelings are hurt, you know. Nobody's talking about the Sony A6500 anymore, so I want to change that. I have owned the Sony A6500 for a couple of months now, maybe more than half a year, so I think I'm ready to tell you why you should buy it. I use it mainly for videos, so keep in mind that this video will be video-directed. Videoception, Jesus. This will be an overall review, but I'm sure at the end you will be able to decide if you want this camera or not. First, let's talk about the build of this camera. And the build is great. It feels good in the hand, but it's slightly too small and slightly too light. So I suggest buying a cage so that you have a little more weight to carry. That way your shots will be more stable and you will feel like you're actually holding a camera. Whereas without a cage, it feels like a toy sometimes. The buttons are overall really good. I like the tactile feel, except for one button. You know how a few seconds ago I said I did video mainly? Well, the record button of this camera sucks. And it's really annoying. But the good thing is that you can basically customize every button of the camera. So I have placed my record button on this button right here, which works way better in my opinion. The custom buttons on this camera are really handy. I have mine set, for example, to white balance, focus settings. I wish I had more of these buttons, but the camera is really small, so I can't really complain. The screen is absolutely terrible. It's not bright enough and it dims in 4K, which absolutely sucks because you have to shoot in 4K. More on that later. But it's just too dim, you can't use it in daylight. This problem is mainly solved in the Sony A7 III, which has a better screen overall, it's brighter. But that isn't even the worst part of the screen. Man, that tilt screen, it just sucks. Give me a flip screen, please Sony, give me a flip screen. I have pretty much solved this problem by buying an external little monitor, which I can angle in whichever direction I want. The viewfinder is top quality, it's really handy, but I don't really use it because I mostly film on a gimbal, and you can't really look in the viewfinder while you're holding your gimbal. So it's not for me, but for some people it's really handy. The ports on this camera are pretty good. I would have wished that it would have a headphone jack, but I understand that it doesn't. It's still a consumer camera. But the thing that does bother me is the flimsiness of the ports. If you plug in your HDMI cable, you can just feel that it will break someday. This problem was solved by adding a clip to my cage. The IBIS, or in-body image stabilization, it's amazing. Filming handheld while walking still really isn't possible, but just making a steady shot is totally doable. Keep in mind that using lenses that have steady shot in them improves on that image stabilization even more. Okay, that was it for the build. Now let's talk about the image quality, and in my opinion, the most important part of this camera. The 4K is just, it's beautiful. It's downscaled 6K from the sensor. And if you then downscale it to 1080p in your timeline, man, it's just so crisp. The 1080p, however, well, it sucks. Whenever I can shoot 4K, I will shoot 4K, and then in post, I'll bring it down to 1080p. That will make it really sharp. I don't really use the 1080p unless I use slow motion. You can see a significant drop in quality in 1080p. It's a really soft image. But you can work around it. Never shoot really wide or really far away objects or landscapes in slow motion. Use your slow motion to film details, to film close-ups. Those will still have lots of detail because it's filling the whole sensor. There's lots of detail to be filled in right there. Another tip is to create a custom setting with a different profile picture. I have changed the 8th picture profile's gamma from S-Log 3 to Cine 3. And then this is really important, go to detail and set that to 0. It won't add any unnatural sharpness, but it will just sharpen the image a little bit more, which you can really use because the image from 1080p is just too soft. Colors are pretty good. You have S-Log 2 and S-Log 3 in there, which is nice. The only thing I do in post is I bring down my mid-greens a little bit because Sony tends to have a little too green footage. The footage isn't really ready to use like it is with, for instance, Canons. You really have to tweak it a bit in post, but I don't really mind because I always do that. I always tweak my images. But if you're someone who just wants to shoot and then upload, well, this camera might not be for you. I would like some better codecs in this camera, but you have to keep in mind how tiny this camera is and how relatively cheap it is compared to cinema cameras. This 4K footage, when not handled too much in post, can look good side by side with a cinema camera of, let's say, $10,000. And that is just amazing to me. And that for me is the biggest reason why you should buy this camera. Let's talk about the autofocus. The autofocus is superb. I never thought that I would use autofocus this much, but man, let me tell you, when you have to do quick jobs and get from A to B really quickly and you need to manually focus, I feel it in post, I need to throw away much more shots than I would when using autofocus right now. This might make me a bad focus puller, I'm pretty sure it does. But I just trust my computer in that camera more than I trust my own hands in quick situations where I don't have the time to really check my focus. Do keep in mind that actual Sony lenses will give you a much better result than, for instance, Canon lenses on an adapter. A big concern for many people is the rolling shutter, and it's pretty bad. But I don't find it that bothering to me. Yeah, sure, sometimes you see it, but when you have those jerky lines that go like this, you can pretty much fix those in post anyways. Where it does bother me is with camera shake. When you just hold your camera, you see some kind of wobble, like a warp effect. And when you then try to put on the warp stabilizer in Premiere Pro, it just doesn't work. Your image becomes kind of jelly. That's why I use a gimbal. When you just film handheld, it sometimes creates some jelliness, which I don't really like. Another con is the battery life. The battery life is really short because it has tiny batteries. Yeah, it's annoying, but just buy a few batteries and you'll be fine. Or if you don't want to switch them out, you can buy a power bank and plug it into the camera. That works as well. Software-wise, I am impressed with all the features this camera has. I come from a Canon and I didn't really have a Rec 709 LUT or S-Log or crop lines. Sony can, however, learn from Canon, because those Sony menus, they're a maze.
Every choice could bring you closer to the center.
Sony, please step up your menu game with an update or something, because it's really a mess. And I feel like that's it. I probably forgot some things, so if I did, then definitely leave that in the comments down below so I can still answer some new questions. Now, when I look back at what I just said, I realized that there are much more cons than pros on this camera. But that main pro, the image quality in 4K, really sells this camera. At this price point, you are going to have to make some compromises. And there are a lot of compromises with this camera. But in my opinion, you can fix a lot of those problems in some kind of way. I really like this camera and I would recommend this camera to people depending on what they do and what they want. But Sony, please give me a flip screen. Okay, I think that's it. I hope you liked this video or found it helpful. If you did, I have some more videos you can check out. If you like them, please consider subscribing. And that's it. Bye bye.